Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVV World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're diving into the ongoing saga that is Georgian politics, where the ruling party, Georgian Dream, is making some pretty daring moves. So while in fact that it's starting to make even their supporters turn heads. If the majority of the society is against your ways, it might be high time to find ways to create a majority for your own. And if you're struggling among the youth of your nation, there's probably a larger group of elders. But first, let's start with the story that leads us into this topic.
Georgia's path to the EU will remain closed unless the country abolishes its foreign agents law and implements all recommendations of the European Commission, a delegation of German politicians visiting Tbilisi said on Friday. The controversial law requires all organizations that receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. Opposition groups have been protesting the law for months, with demonstrations sometimes turning violent. Officials from the US and the EU have criticized the law as being modeled on a Russian look-alike law used by the Kremlin to stifle dissent and clamp down on democratic opposition. In May, Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili vetoed the bill, which only delayed its adoption. Later in May, the parliament passed the law. The staunchest supporter of the bill is Bidzina Ivanishvili. The influential billionaire and founder of the country's ruling Georgian Dream party has repeatedly slammed the West for meddling in Georgia's internal affairs.
Ivanishvili is a person, pro-Russian tycoon, oligarch who earned a lot of money in Russia in the 90s, and of course, he's a number one agent of influence from Russia, and of course, he wants to monopolize the power with this law.
The German delegation representing 4 parties of the government coalition and the main opposition party traveled to Georgia to call for free and fair parliamentary elections on October 26th. Another member of the delegation, Social Democrat Niels Schmidt, felt that with the current government's policies, there was no way for Georgia to become a member of the European Union. He added that should no changes be made, his party would not back the opening of EU membership negotiations for Georgia.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Georgian Dream, which I should note sound like the name of an expensive mattress company, has proposed declaring Orthodox Christianity the state religion. Now, on the surface, that might sound like no big deal. You could argue, isn't that basically what they're doing already? More than 80% of the population in Georgia identifies as Orthodox Christian. The church holds massive influence over social and political life, so what's the problem? Well, here it is. Georgia's constitution currently describes the state as secular, as in not run by religious leaders. There's even a nice little clause that acknowledges the importance of the Georgian Orthodox Church without letting them take the wheel. So basically, it's the same as saying, you're very important, but please stay in your lane. But Georgian Dream, well, they looked at that line and said, maybe we should take a hard turn into theocracy. Why would they do this, you ask? Well, is it because they've all found Jesus? No, it's because they have an election coming up, and this proposal is basically the political equivalent of sending a dozen roses to the Georgian Orthodox Church with a card that reads, "Please love me." But here's the twist. The Georgian Orthodox Church, which usually loves a good bit of state-backed reverence, has responded with the spiritual equivalent of, yeah, we're gonna pass on this one. In fact, the church is skeptical of the idea. One key player from the church's leadership came out swinging, calling this proposal a process of mutual subordination. Which is pretty much church speaks for, hell no, we don't want the government running our baptism, thanks. And they have good reasons to be skeptical. The church took a good look at what happened in Greece, where Orthodoxy is the state religion, and they didn't like what they saw. There, the government controls everything. Church budgets, appointments, and even which bishop gets to play bishop. The state treats the church like a department in a badly run corporation, and Georgia's patriarchate doesn't want to be caught in that same mess. You see, Georgian Dream has been showing some, let's call it, authoritarian tendencies. And this proposal to make Orthodoxy the state religion is just the latest chapter in their grand playbook of consolidating power, and it's causing some major backlash. Georgian Dream is trying to use religion as a political tool because nothing says vote for me like pretending to defend the faith. It's the same playbook we've seen around the world, from Viktor Orban in Hungary to Vladimir Putin in Russia. When in doubt, wrap yourself in the flag, hug a priest, and watch your approval ratings rise. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Grigor Ulihise, Director of Foreign Policy Council. Sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So we are trying to figure out what the situation in Georgia is, especially with this involvement, the Georgian Dream Party trying to involve the church of all things into its politics. Usually we'd expect some separation of church and state, but even the church doesn't seem to be so on board with this. Can you help us break down the situation?
The ruling team is trying to win these elections at all costs because it is in difficulty and is trying to mobilize everything it has and does not. And one of the most effective mechanisms right now is the informal and formal union with the Georgian Orthodox Church, which is one of the strongest institutions in the country with high public support. And that's why the Georgian Dream is attempting to reach an agreement with the Georgian Patriarchate in order to get more votes. And apart from that, offer so-called carrot to the Georgian Orthodox Church, which will be increased funding and most likely increased, let's say, rights and opportunities that the clergymen will have, which is not a good signal for the Georgian state and democracy. Of course, strong charge does not exclude the democratic character of the country, but we are in an abnormal situation where undemocratic and illiberal tendencies become everyday agenda of the ruling team. And unfortunately, due to the weak positions and low popularity index of the opposition parties, the Georgian Dream is able to do whatever it wants.
Right, like you mentioned, a strong church is not an indication of a bad democracy, but it's an incentive behind funding and giving these churches power that is a worrisome phenomenon. And what is interesting, like you mentioned, there's a lot of carrot, so to speak, that is trying to convince the Orthodox Church in endorsing the Georgian Dream Party, but they have actually even came out and say that, actually we don't want to really participate in this. What's the contradiction there?
There are two main reasons. First of all, the Georgian Orthodox Church sees some kind of risks that there will be increased control over them by the government, which is quite legitimate. For example, in case of the Greek Orthodox Church, without the blessing and the final confirmation of the Minister of Culture, if I'm not mistaken, the Patriarch of Greece cannot be elected. And there are some kind of concerns in this regard among the clergymen. This is the main reason. They don't want the state to control them. And another issue is the fact that they quite wisely understand the reality in which Georgia is. I mean, the polarized society. Will such kind of decision lead to the increase of their popularity index? They're not sure, because most likely the majority, or at least the half of Georgians, are against of this government. And choosing the position in this complicated political context will not lead to good consequences, most likely to the Georgian Church, which is, once again, I repeat, the most popular institution together with the Georgian army.
Right, so it does seem like, to analyze for us, a lot of downside for not really a lot of gains. What's the Georgian Dream Party's aim? Look, who are they trying to, which part of the electorate are they trying to target with such a move?
The first part of their, I would say, supporters or pseudo-supporters is related to the people who were damaged and hit by the previous government. And the whole governmental propaganda is based and constructed on this issue that if we lose, they will come back and take a revenge. There will be a vendetta. Apart from that, they have picked up a very sensitive for Georgians issue, the war topic. I mean, if we lose these elections, Russia will invade Georgia. Of course, it does not matter who will be in power in Georgia, because if Russia decides to invade Georgia, Moscow will go forward. Does not matter who will be in the Georgian government, because frankly speaking, Georgia is partially and even more under the Russian control because of the troops that are stationed 25-30 kilometers away from the capital city and in a very complicated geopolitical context. And that's why these two main narratives form the propaganda of the Georgian Dream. There is no positive day agenda. There are no promises in terms of economic or healthcare progress, developments, reforms, nothing related to this issue. We have a very toxic pre-election campaign. And another I would say segment of the potential supporters of Georgian Dream is more or less pro-Russian part of the society, which is a marginal part. But that's why the combination of these two elements gives some hopes to the Georgian government, and of course the resource related to the state agencies. There are thousands and 10,000s of Georgians who work for this bureaucratic machine. Their salaries are low, but still they're informally controlled by the government. That's a huge resource for the ruling team in terms of the elections, and their families. The prisoners, I mean, those captive the Georgians who remain in the custody or might be arrested in the near future. And in terms of some services and the mobilization of votes for the ruling team, they might be pardoned. That's a very, I would say, malicious but quite common tendency in Georgia, unfortunately, we have to admit, which was started by the previous government, and this scheme is kept by the ruling team even today.
Right, so like you mentioned, Georgia's current ruling party is running a campaign that's relatively toxic when it comes to how their messaging goes, and their support is, of course, dwindling, like you mentioned as well, relegating back to like these more niche elements. My question will be, how did they get into power in the first place if their policy position has never been so productive with only appealing to voters in a more niche clique?
At the beginning, they managed to come to power democratically, of course, because of the catastrophic mistakes committed by the previous government, who was run by Mr. Saakashvili. And I find a lot of similarities between that elections, which were held in October 2012 and will be also conducted on October 26, but this year. And this toxic character of the elections is a common feature for the Georgian political life. But that's quite understandable, because this is a country with a very short history of statehood. But Georgians learn quite easily. But frankly speaking, the main problem, apart from the government which is striving towards Russia, is the absence of effective opposition. Because Georgians are the nation who needs the leader that will lead to the transformation and change. It was in 90s when President Gamsakhurdia was the main character and protagonist from this point of view, then Eduard Shevardnadze, then Mikhail Saakashvili, then Bizina Ivanishvili. And this issue, the absence of a real leader who will take responsibility and lead the nation towards the change, is the main drawback of the opposition. Apart from that, their pre-election campaign is very weak without a clear message, what kind of change there will be. The only effective statement made by the potential opposition coalition is the following: if we choose us, there will be more perspectives in terms of European integration. If you choose the ruling team, you will end up like Belarus. That was a clear message. But once again, I repeat that the government committed so much and made so much mistakes that if there would have been an opposition with an effective day agenda, right now the reality would have been completely different, and most likely we would have another government.
All right, so situation is looking kind of bleak. How's the feeling on the ground when it comes to the election that's approaching? Do you think that they find it to be a fair election? Is there still faith in the democratic system?
That's the most complicated question of our conversation. First of all, my knowledge about the election issues is very limited because I do not know how the technique works in terms of election. As experts say, it is very difficult to falsify the election results because of these modern and contemporary techniques and mechanisms. But if the Georgian government, the Georgian Dream says that they got 70%, for example, as Maduro did in Venezuela, who will oppose it from the Georgian opposition? I do not see anybody because there is no leader and they understand it quite well. The biggest problem and the major one will be for the Georgian Dream in this case. I do not wish to see this scenario, but anyway, will be the non-recognition of the elections from the West, which will be catastrophic, first of all, for Georgians and then for the government.
Right, so again, quite a bleak image there. Thank you so much for helping us breaking all of this down, though. Really appreciate it. And thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express. Thank you. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia has been going on about not wanting Western weapons on its territory, but feels fair sending its drones across NATO members. On Sunday, Latvia and Romania accused Moscow of doing just that.
The violation of NATO members' airspace by Russian drones has become par for the course of Moscow's provocative stance. In its latest display, Russia allowed its UAVs to enter Romania's airspace on Sunday. The NATO members' Foreign Affairs Ministry protested the fact on X. On the day of the incident, Bucharest scrambled 2 fighter jets to track the path of a drone before it turned around to Ukraine. Romania also dispatched its military to calm the perimeter of Periprava, a village located on the Ukrainian border where another Russian drone is believed to have crashed. Just a day earlier, a Russian drone violated Latvia's airspace. The Latvian president said on X that such incidents on NATO's eastern flank were becoming ever more frequent. This UAV came from Belarus, which continues launching drones designed to wreak havoc in Ukraine.
Carousel voting, barring observers from entering polling stations, vote buying, opposition candidates not allowed to run, you name it, Russia's local so-called elections got it all. And it does seem that incumbents and other loyalists of Vladimir Putin and his United Russia Party are expected to seize an undisputed victory in the vote that lacked any genuine competition.
Russia's local elections took place from Friday to Sunday in a total of 83 regions and cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. But the ballot was far from meeting democratic standards. Election monitors reported a slew of infractions. For instance, in the Krasnoselsky district of St. Petersburg, as many as 112 observers were not allowed to monitor voting. Observers were also refused entry to polling stations in the Moscow district, in the southwest Bryansk region, and in the central region of Bashkortostan. On top of that, the Central Election Commission said on Saturday that 4,600 digital attacks on electronic voting systems had been reported. Elections also took place in Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs had denounced the ballot as illegitimate, adding that those involved in the preparation and holding of the so-called elections would be prosecuted.
A rift among German top officials on the country's stance on the ongoing war in Ukraine became more pronounced this weekend. There are two contradictory approaches. One calls for continued support of Ukraine. The other one prioritizes peace talks as soon as possible. More in this report.
German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has slammed Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats for scaling down support for Ukraine just 2 weeks before a key state election. At a party meeting in the city of Potsdam, Baerbock, a member of the Greens and a stalwart ally of Ukraine in its defensive war against the Russian invader, said she had counted on Brandenburg Premier Dietmar Woidke to continue supporting Kyiv. But the situation unfolded differently, to her dismay. The regional chapter of the SPD wavered on supplying arms to the country. Meanwhile, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz pressed for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia to begin sooner. A new peace conference with Russia among the participants is what the German Chancellor said he agreed on in recent talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The rift in Germany's stance comes as Scholz finds himself under pressure following his center-left coalition's painful losses in 2 regional state elections 1 week ago, at the expense of groups seeking better relations with Moscow.
Now to wrap up this Easter news flash, nearly 50% of Russian citizens have felt anxious since Ukraine launches incursion into the Kursk region. Here's more on the Russians' feelings.
A recent survey by the Foundation for Public Opinion has shown that 49% of Russians have felt anxious since the Ukrainian armed forces entered the Kursk Oblast on August 6th. This is a record high since September 2023. As many as 52% of survey respondents pointed to the war against Ukraine as the main disturbing event, with 28% indicating specifically the Ukrainian operation in Kursk Oblast. Meanwhile, 45% of Russians felt calm prevailing in their milieus. This in turn is the lowest percentage in a year. May 2023 was the last time when anxiety trumped stability. This was due to the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion raiding Russia's Belgorod Oblast.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.